let's talk about the two cases that that are in front of the Supreme Court at this minute. One dealing with Harvard, one dealing with the University of North Carolina, brought by SFFA, which is a Students for Fair Admissions organization, a right-wing organization that is looking to essentially quash what remains of affirmative action in admissions process in colleges.
Yes.
Would you walk us through what the implications of these going away will be, and then we will talk about some of the suggestions that you have in the book to deal with this problem.
So what we're dealing with in the Supreme Court in the Harvard and UNC cases now are essentially the same issues that the Supreme Court dealt with in the Michigan case in 2003 and in the two cases from the University of Texas. The only thing that's changed, and the same group is finding them, it's a conservative organization that has a lot of black money, and they can't even, and they're trying to not, what the added focus is, they're trying to divide students of color by saying Asian students are being disadvantaged by affirmative action at Harvard. But the only thing that's changed is the Reagan justices. So even though they lost the same case twice in the two Texas cases, the Fisher cases, they're back again because they think they have the votes. So the implications of these things are that you take the affirmative action policies, which are basically voluntary policies decided on by the great majority of selective colleges in the United States as necessary to produce even a semblance of diversity. And what they would do is to make all of those voluntary policies to integrate their campuses illegal and unconstitutional, and forbid colleges to do things that they had been praised for doing and even required to do for a half century. And all of a sudden, everything that was race conscious, if it's a sweeping decision, we don't know what it'll be, but if it's a really broad decision, almost everything that would be race conscious would be subject to attack right away. And in half of our states that are controlled by extremely conservative governments, it's very unlikely that anything much would survive. In other places, it would be a very complex situation that we've experienced here in California now since the 1990s, since we've had an affirmative action ban.
So what, let's assume for a moment that that's going to happen, because I think it's a pretty safe assumption. If I was a betting person, it would just be a question of to what degree will colleges be inhibited from considering race at all in the sort of multiple elements that they consider when they're talking about admissions, ranging from what high school you went to, I'm gender parity for the most part. I mean, there's just a half a dozen, if not a dozen, of these factors that they look at when they decide admission. But let's assume, for the sake of argument, that the Supreme Court rules that is in some way unconstitutional. What then? I mean, I know you have a host of ideas as to like what we need to do. What would some of them be?
Well, one of them is we shouldn't give up on this. We should keep fighting it because there isn't going to be a really good alternative. In terms of the alternatives that you can work on, we should certainly work on the financial issue, which is a huge barrier to even fully qualified students of color who can meet normal admission standards. They don't go because of their family financial situation. We should have guarantees for at least the first year or two of college for kids who are highly qualified from really disadvantaged backgrounds. Now, there's a lot of students of color who aren't from extremely disadvantaged backgrounds, but have been discriminated against because of residential segregation and because of what happens inside of schools. They would not. It's really hard to think of a way to reach them directly. If we concentrate on high poverty neighborhoods and students who have lived with long-term poverty, we're going to get a minority population, but they're going to be in high schools that haven't prepared them. In terms of preparing kids in high schools, what we have to do is we have to create honest-to-God pre-collegiate courses in very disadvantaged schools where there aren't that many students who are prepared to take them. We have to be ready to pay to run those anyway, or we have to be prepared to transfer students to places where there is a path to college. We need more magnet schools operated under policies that actually reach out to and enroll really disadvantaged students and students of color systematically. We need to think about other aspects of inequality that will be legal to consider. We will be in the ironic situation that the only thing you can't consider is considering race, which of course is necessary to change race. The Supreme Court recognized that 50 years ago. But we could consider native language, for example. We consider bilingualism as an asset for getting to college. We could consider a number of things that would help some groups. Especially, it's easier to think about things that would help diversity for Latino students, for example. To think the most serious problems are for blacks and Native Americans. You don't have anything that's a relative proxy there that, except for poverty, and poverty doesn't work very well if you combine poverty with admissions requirements. We have a lot of evidence to show that it's just not adequate and that it excludes a lot of talented students of color. We could think about more dual enrollment programs so that we would have students from really bad high schools enrolled in community college courses, for example. We do a lot of that now, but it tends to be the more advantaged students that take advantage of those programs. We need to get students from really isolated areas onto campus somehow or other, period, and encourage them about going to college. We desperately need academic support for transition to college for students who've been denied decent high schools. And we have to think
these are all, I mean, they all sound like a good suite of policies, but where do these get implemented? So, I mean, we're talking about, on one hand, we're talking about like high school reform, on one hand, we're talking about providing free college opportunities, because all of this, I guess, is like there's no one big solution. There's just going to have to be a tiny bunch of bites and nibbles around this problem, because the primary tool that we have had as a society over the past 50, 60 years is about to go away. So, like, a lot of these things have.
Yeah, we should be thinking about federal higher education policy in light of anything that's going to happen with the Supreme Court. And the problem, we shouldn't be thinking just about forgiving student loans, which I favor, but it's a very expensive policy and doesn't do anything for students who haven't gone to college yet or never went to college. So we need to think about really raising the Pell Grant.
Or what about? I mean, and I suggest this, I mean, without sort of, as we're not sort of like contemplating the political, I guess, chances of any of these things happening necessarily, but wouldn't a free college option in every state essentially achieve that most efficiently?
It wouldn't be adequate by itself. We had free college in California for a long time. You know, the City University of New York had free college for generations before the city went bankrupt in the 1970s. Free college is a really good idea, but it's not enough, because you still have the preparation problem and you have the support problem for kids who go to college. You have to live while you're in college. So you have to have some resources from somewhere in addition to no tuition. And if you have free college, you'd be aiding a lot of students who really don't need it. as well. So, and it would be incredibly expensive. So you have to think about targeting these programs, or you have to think about getting a gigantic increase in resources going into higher education. Higher education has done really badly in terms of state resources since the 1980s.
Higher education as a private institution or as a public institution?
Public institution has done really badly in terms of the level of resources per student that the state governments have provided.
Right, I see. So there's been cutbacks on the state level.
Major cutbacks. The share of the cost of public higher education that's paid for by the public has gone way down. Here at UCLA, for example, the state of California provides less than a tenth of the cost of operating our university.
All right. Well, so what would you do first? I mean, putting aside sort of like the chances of it happening politically. I mean, I don't think there's going to be as much of a problem with people going to a free university who don't need to, as you might. But and I think one of the problems that we've seen with targeting this money is that it becomes extremely politically vulnerable. Well, there's a reason why we have seen over the course of, I guess it is 50 years, a 50% plus reduction in the amount that Pell Grants cover. And that's because it was targeted. That's my my story.
It's not targeted in terms of race. It's targeted in terms of poverty. But I agree. The best thing to do would be to have free college and support systems and adequate preparation in high school. It would be terrific. It would be incredibly expensive. Just thinking about forgiving part of the debt from the last generation of mismanaged policy has such large costs, of course, that it's being sued and prevented now in courts around the country. Thinking about actually going to much more massive public funding of the basic functions of college would make a lot of sense for the future of our society, but it would require new resources that don't exist now, and they would have to be available on a sustained basis. I would be completely in favor of that if it could be done, with our existing political system.
Right.
Very unlikely.